was scrolling through Facebook when I came across a photo of my grandfather shaking hands with Pope Francis. It was 2013, so Facebook was the social media platform. So this picture confused me and also irritated me. My family lives in Montreal, Canada, and I was here in Ireland and was nunno in Italy and nobody told me, was nunno in Europe and didn't try even to coordinate a visit with me. So at that point I'd been living in Ireland for 12 years. And our relationship was complicated. We spent a lot of time together, but he was a man who yelled a lot, and I don't like being yelled at. He didn't call me on my birthday, but would get mad at me if I didn't call him on my birthday because he wanted to speak with me, which is senior logic. So I was looking at this picture on Facebook of Nunno shaking hands with Pope Francis, and I was baffled and annoyed. So I called my mother, rang my mother. Is Nunno in Italy and nobody told me? She said, of course not, he's at home. I said, I'm looking at a picture of him on Facebook, shaking hands with the Pope. He's in Italy, right? She said, the Pope lives in the Vatican, yes. Your grandfather can't be in Italy. He needs dialysis 3 times per week. He's in the nursing home. The picture is probably just photoshopped. I said, it doesn't look photoshopped. Can you call the nursing home and check? She said, in that very calm voice you might use for somebody having an episode, okay, Karina, I'll call the nursing home where your grandfather is, and I'll call you back to tell you he's there. A moment later, the phone rings. Your grandfather's in Italy. He had snuck off to Italy for a private audience with the Pope who wanted to meet him because in 2013, he was one of 2 people alive who survived the October 16th transportation of 1,023 Jewish people from the ghetto in Rome to concentration camps. This day was an anniversary commemoration, and the Pope was paying his respects to my grandfather. And then he met the Italian president, was on the Italian version of CNN. Somebody published an Enzo Camerino Wikipedia page, and videos of him were posted on YouTube, which have thousands of views. My grandfather, Enzo Camerino, survived Auschwitz. He was born and lived in Italy. He grew up in a time when fascist laws in Italy were slowly taking his rights to live a normal life because he was Jewish. By 1942, his father no longer had permission to run a business, and he and his siblings were no longer allowed to attend school. He was limited to what he was allowed to do and where he was allowed to be. The anti-Semitism got worse and worse, and when he was 14 years old, at Viale della Milizie, not the Jewish ghetto, there was a knock at the door at the crack of dawn. It was German officers there to take him, his mother, his father, his sister, his brother, and his uncle. The officers told them to pack suitcases for a short trip. They should bring their valuables with them. They were then taken to an army barracks with the other Jewish families, and from there they were crammed into cattle cars and traveled for days to eventually arrive at Auschwitz, the most notorious concentration camp of the Holocaust. Upon arrival at the camp, the people were separated into queues: women, children, elderly, disabled, men who were willing to work, and men who did not want to work. Enzo's father, whose name was Italo, said that they would work. So Italo was tattooed with the number 158508. Enzo was tattooed with the number 158509. And his brother Luciano was tattooed with the number 158510. It was the last time he ever saw his mother Julia, the last time he ever saw his sister Wanda, and the last time he saw his uncle Renato. The first job he was made to do at the camp was as a barber. He shaved prisoners' heads as they arrived at the camp before their shower. Enzo also worked in the coal mines, and he was underground when his father died. He collapsed from exertion and exhaustion and cold. So now it was just him and his brother Luciano. When the American and Russian armies were heading in to liberate the camps, Nazis hurried to exterminate even more prisoners. Enzo and Luciano were moved with the group into the woods in the night. Luciano told Enzo that they should run into the dark woods. They might die trying to escape, but they would most certainly die if they didn't escape. So they ran, and they escaped. Of the 1,023 people who were rounded up on the 16th of October 1943, only 16 people survived, including Enzo and Luciano. My grandfather, Enzo Camarino, was the youngest to survive. He eventually built a life after the war. He got married, and my father was born in Rome in 1952. Enzo named him after his father, who died in Auschwitz, Italy. The Camarinos moved to Montreal in 1958, and my aunt was born. Enzo named her after his mother, who died in Auschwitz, Julia. The Italian immigrants in Montreal lived in the same neighborhood as very religious Jewish people, but even there, Enzo didn't want anyone to know that they were Jewish, because he never felt safe. I remember that Enzo never slept in his bed. He slept sitting up in a chair, if he slept at all. His bed was only used for drying pasta sheets for making lasagna. Enzo was not a cuddly grandpa. I always knew why, but I didn't begin to understand why until I got older and had a family of my own. I imagine that he must have always been afraid and always on alert for danger. I try to imagine what it must have been like when his own son was born. When my stepson was 14 years old and I was working with Holocaust Education Ireland, I was sharing Enzo's story and wondering to myself if Liam would survive as Enzo did, if it were him, if he were born in a different time. My son Nico is almost 6 years old now, and when I share Enzo's story, I also wonder if I would survive being separated from Nico and unable to protect him, as happened to Enzo's mother. In 2005 and 2006, Enzo was invited to lead a group of Italian students to Auschwitz. In 2006, my father and I joined him there. It was the worst trip of my life. It was so difficult to see what was preserved in this incredibly important monument. There is a huge warehouse with floor-to-ceiling piles of reading glasses, human hair, suitcases, and shoes taken from the prisoners on their arrival. My Italian is rubbish, so I couldn't talk about it with anyone, and Enzo was very busy and very in demand. He was like a tour guide there. He was showing us the devices that were used to lift dead bodies from their pile in a wheelbarrow into the incinerator. He had his sleeve rolled up to keep his tattoo on show, and he wore a yarmulke, the Jewish cap, out of respect, because we were in Auschwitz, which is the largest grave in the world. Everyone wanted his autograph. Journalists wanted his photograph. And years later, in 2013, he popped up on my Facebook feed, shaking hands with Pope Francis. So in 2014, I decided to go to Rome for the 16th of October because I took an educated guess that he'd be there. I wasn't going to wait for him to tell me this time. And I was right. And that year, he met again with his old friend, Pope Francis. I personally was very busy in 2014. I was working on opening a business, a bakery, coffee shop here in Dublin, and had decided to call it Camarino Bakery. Enzo was invited to give a short video with the Shoah organization in Rome, which records testimony from Holocaust survivors for historical posterity. I was there in the room for the interview, and they were asking him specifically about his escape. How did he make his way back to Rome? So Enzo eventually made his way back to Italy. He hitched a lift with a truck carrying coffee beans. You see, part of the Camarino family were coffee roasters. and had converted to Roman Catholicism when fascist laws were making it difficult to do business. They mostly escaped persecution. So Enzo flagged down this truck, and the driver wouldn't carry anyone. There were too many displaced people. It was the Camerino name that convinced the truck driver to take Enzo back to Rome. When I decided to call my coffee shop Camerino, I didn't appreciate how important the name was to the fact that I exist at all.